So I'm going to read this second paragraph real quickly. Stone wrote that in prehistoric and early historic periods of human development, religions existed in which people revered their supreme creator as female. And Mr. Stone was an author himself. The full name of the author is Merlin Stone. And he wrote a book called When God Was a Woman. So it goes on to say the great goddess, the divine ancestress, had been worshipped from the beginning of the Neolithic period of 7000 BC until the closing of the last goddess temple about AD 500. Some authorities would extend goddess worship so far into the past as the Upper Paleolithic age of about, listen to this, 25,000 BC. 25,000 BC. Way past the time that the Ethiopian volcano eruption of the last 12,000 years. It finished off in this paragraph that says, yet events of the Bible, which we are generally taught to think of as taking place in the beginning of time, actually occurred in historic periods. Abraham, first prophet of the Hebrew Christian God Yahweh, more familiarly known as Jehovah, is believed by most Bible scholars to have lived no earlier than 1800 BC and possibly as last as 1550 BC. So what we have to be open to here is that we have not been given the full picture. And what was described to me many, many, many years ago is that the lie will become the truth and the truth will become the lie, and that is where we live right now. And that there is an inversion of reality. And because we live in a different world, the earth is long-standing, will not pass away, but worlds come and go. And so we have to consider what was originally the truth, because that is what's going to ultimately set us free. So I'm going to read this last little thing here. Okay, it says on page 8, it says the masses of the world believe in Christianity and its white male depiction of God. Islam does not attempt to portray an actual image of Allah, despite all historical logic and its conveniently concealed evidence, as if there never were religions other than Christianity and Islam that had another, arguably more accurate representation of the supreme deity. It goes on to say African Americans in particular seem to forget that neither Christianity nor Islam was the original religion of West African people, nor was it normally chosen by them without some type of coercion from their European and Arab conquerors. And basically, what I think is that it was under the pain of torture and even tortured to death. And I don't have to think there's historical evidence of it. And so even with the Nation of Islam, both religions and Christianity, both of them were given to us under the pain of death. And there's a saying that anything that is worth its weight in gold, or that is true, you won't need to kill somebody in order for them to believe it. Though they will, if it's worth its weight in gold, it will hold under that pressure. And if we are to believe the story of creation in the Bible, both creation stories, um, the creator of the universe didn't do it under the pain of death. In the first part of the Bible, you know what? Let me get the Bible. Let me read that. The first creation story. Okay, so in Genesis chapter 1, I'm going to read verses 24 through 27. It says, Then God said, Let the earth produce every sort of animal, each producing offspring of the same kind, livestock, small animals that scurry along the ground, and wild animals. And that is what happened. God made all sorts of wild animals, livestock, and small animals, each animal to produce offspring of the same kind. And God saw that it was good. And then God said, Let us make human beings in our image to be like ourselves. They will reign over the fish in the seas, the birds in the sky, the livestock, all the wild animals on the earth, and the small animals that scurry around the ground. In 27, it says, So God created human beings and it says here, his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them. So here's where we have possibly the first deception. Because one, most people think of Adam and Eve, and then two, even with this edition here, the New Living Translation, second edition, it has God almost as if he's schizophrenic. So if he was speaking and it was just only him, he would just simply say, I'm going to go ahead and create this. He wouldn't say, let us. So, and we know that when we do the research in other books that it says Elohim. So, and Elohim is many gods. And but you can see the trickery that takes place even with one word, right? The us versus God. And then it says here, when they put the he's in there, in the original text, it is said that there was no gender assigned to these things unless it was talking about a specific person or people. But my point is, before we even get to the creation of Adam, which is a few more chapters within the book, that there's another a creation, that there were people on the planet that had power. They had been given a power to rule over the earth, and that the earth was fully formed and functioning when they arrived. And perhaps this is the period thousands of years before 6,000 that God was considered to be or was represented in the female human body. So now I'm going back to the book When God Was a Black Woman and Why She Isn't Now. And I'm going to continue reading on page 8 of the book. It says, Wilson established, this is the second paragraph, Wilson established that we must keep in mind that enslaved Africans were not Christians when they were brought to the New World and when they were encountered here in the New World, that they ran and that they controlled, and that the invaders took over through bloodshed. But I'll continue on. They were predominantly practitioners of their indigenous African or native religions and behaved in accord with indigenous African codes of ethics or indigenous codes of ethics. And they were prosperous, and their technology was far superior than anything that was in existence anywhere on the earth, as well as what is even in existence now. So the paragraph goes on. Therefore, the Christian religion, along with its ideological doctrine, was taught to and imposed on enslaved Africans by their white masters, and that includes Arabia. That includes Arabia, which includes Islam. It goes on to say, obviously, the masters taught the slaves Christianity for their own conscious and unconscious self-serving reasons. It says the theology they passed on to their slaves was necessarily biased in order to serve and justify their dominance. Consequently, in brackets, it says Christianity, as it is practiced in the African American community, has probably done as much to disempower that community than to empower it. And because we are still arguing, it has done something called division between the male and female lines of our existence. And that probably has kept us more under the heel of these people than anything else. It concludes by saying most people, regardless of race or gender, will find it virtually impossible because of religious conditioning and or secular ignorance that God, whenever depicted in human form, was originally depicted as a black woman. African Americans are arguably the most apprehensive to refute what has been taught to them as divine, primarily because of the impact enslavement and subsequent cultural imperialism has had on our religious belief. Let me read that again. African Americans are arguably the most apprehensive to refute what has been taught to them as divine, primarily because of the impact, enslavement, and subsequent cultural imperialism. And of course, with Europeans and Arabs, that culture had the male up at front and in a brutal way, by the way. The male dominance of these two nations produced a whole lot of death, more death than any African, any American, Native American of this landmass, North and South, has ever produced in the world. They are brutal, violent people, and that is what we have taken on. But it goes on to say, primarily because of the impact enslavement and subsequent cultural imperialism has had on our religious beliefs, we demand concrete proof of such a ridiculous proposition as God originally being depicted as a black woman, even though we never demand such for a pale, blonde-haired, blue-eyed depiction of Jesus, at least not until fairly recently, and definitely not en masse. Most of us just accept him as fact, despite the logic of the very biblical documentation that came along with the image. Hair like wool, feet of bronze, born in a region of predominantly dark-skinned people. John L. Ellis proposed that there is more evidence for a black Jesus than a white one, and in order to be politically correct, you must be historically correct. Matthew chapter 1, he gives the map in verses 1 through 17, names at least 3 black women in Jesus' ancestry. In addition, depictions of Jesus are found in Revelations 1, verses 14-15, and Daniel 7, verse 9, or at the very least of a non-white man. In fact, the Roman Emperor Justinian the Great minted a gold coin that carried a depiction of Jesus as a woolly-haired black man. It is a matter of historical record that all early statues, paintings, and other depictions of Jesus and Mary were black throughout Europe until around 400 AD, i.e., what is called now the Black Madonna. To this very day, the Black Madonna is being held at the Vatican in Rome. Worship of the Black Madonna and the Egyptian goddess Isis were both well established in Europe by 1450 AD. However, it became politically expedient to change the color of black Jesus to white Christ in order to continue the enslavement of blacks worldwide. Okay, it goes on to clearly confirm that Jesus was born to Mary, a Jew of the tribe of Judah, a non-white people, black people in the same sense that the Arabs were people, in the same sense that the Egyptians were black people. Jesus was a black Messiah born to a black woman. The picture of the Black Madonna which are all over the world, did not all turn black through some mysterious accident. Portraits of the Black Madonna are historic, and we know that Russia actually came out and kind of to their credit, they came out and confirmed this that the relics of depiction of Christianity were of black people. I'm going to drop down to the last paragraph on page 9 here. It says, yet before the Black Power movement of the 1960s, and to a lesser degree Marcus Garvey and the Universal Negro Improvement Association of the 1920s, most African Americans thought that this historical fact was ludicrous, just like the majority of people who see the cover of this book more than likely will think that the historical fact that God, whenever depicted in human form, was originally depicted as a black woman is ludicrous. And so in 1920s, I think about the Tulsa, Oklahoma riots, right? And you think about Mrs. Viola Fletcher, who died at 111, the last of two remaining women who have brought the case before America, and America has staunchly said, no, we're not going to produce justice for you. We'll wait until you die. and so it is this enmity that exists between the woman and between Satan and between her seed and his seed that we are seeing played out and have seen played out throughout the annals of history since the time of Rome and Greece, because that is when Satan was allowed to take over that world and all the subsequent worlds that has followed. So it says here, nevertheless, haven't we been warned not to judge any book by its cover? It goes on to say on page 10, virtually whenever a negative depiction or even a suspicious inquiry of Christianity is offered to most African Americans, they become apprehensive and defensive because so much of their opiate is based not on facts or logic, but blind faith, counterfeit wisdom, immature assumptions deposited via the banking method of theology, as well as an addictive relationship. And he goes on to say on the latter claim, he is going to elaborate. So he says, during their enslavement, our ancestors developed an addiction to religious escapism in response to their perceived, and I would put real, behavioral powerlessness, which continued post-enslavement due to the continuation of perception, or really of our reality. So why am I saying all this? Because we're going to have to consider that if these are the days like Noah to the Most High God, and that there are multiple prophecies that are converging in this time period, and that the Lord of hosts would be handing out retribution and will be dealing in vengeance to recoup the cost that has been laid upon the children of Israel and the children of the great Satan. If Armageddon is really underfoot as we speak, then we have to consider to whom the bell actually tolls. So I can't help but consider the biblical verse of Genesis 3:15. It says, "And I shall put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He will bruise you in the head, and you will bruise him in the heel." So I think that there was probably some corruption in the latter part of this verse of the he and the him, because you have to understand that these holy writings that were kept in vassals, that they would open up and roll out, that when the Romans and the Greeks and the Arabians and of course the English, when they were all coming in, these people who worship a male deity, that that they had um, impetus to corrupt the scriptures, okay, or and corrupt the holy oracles that the Bible and other books contain. So they can put things in, they can take things out, and they can alter things or obscure things. And that is why many people would have to have the spirit or the holy anointing to guide them through the scriptures. There's some that you read, and some that you don't read, and some that when you read you can see the game that is being played, and that sounds more plausible because of where we are in the stream of time, that that we do not walk the halls of power anymore as black women at all, and we haven't since the advent of of, uh, of the European engaging in Africa, and then ultimately engaging in North and what is now called North and South America. And also to I quickly want to say that particularly because they don't do any archaeological um, movies or documentaries in America, they keep that on the hush hush. That I believe what some scholars out there that are saying that the real story about America is the story of the Bible, and that the historical pinpoint reference is right here on the soil that is underneath our feet in North and also in South America, but really in North America. I believe that North America was the stronghold of black women in particularly, and that they were the ones really that were feeding and furnishing Africa and not the other way around. And quite possibly the cradle of civilization was here in this part of the world, and that power dynamic has to be shifted back. Again, we don't need to be offended by this. This is the truth, and some of this truth came out of the mouths of black men. So from their mouths to your ears, it is something to consider. Thank you.